SuperTalk Mississippi Media production.
Never take your heart health for granted. For just $99, you can get a complete screening and know your risks. Call 601-249-5198 to schedule your Happy Healthy Heart screening at Southwest Mississippi Regional Medical Center.
This is Gerard Gibert, and thank you for listening to MidDays here on SuperTalk Mississippi.
MidDays with Gerard Gibert is on the air. MidDays with Gerard Gibert is powered by C-Spire. Power your home or business with C-Spire Fiber. To learn more, visit supertalk.fm/C-Spire. C-Spire Fiber powers SuperTalk Mississippi. Get ready to go beyond the headlines and join a meaningful conversation with people from around the state. Hello. You're listening to MidDays with Gerard Gibert here on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to MidDays, SuperTalk Mississippi. I'm your host, Gerard Gibert, along with Rhino in the Element Wealth Studio, guiding you through the middle of your day with facts, fodder, and fine music on this
Friday Eve.
And a dang cold one it is out there as well. Did we set some records? I don't think so, huh? But we got pretty doggone cold.
Didn't see any.
It's really cold up there in the old northeastern, midwestern regions of the great United States. Man, don't check your 401k plans this morning. Don't look good. The Dow presently down 572 points. The NASDAQ also experiencing a sell-off of 183 points. The old funny money's up a little bit, but it struggled to eclipse the 100,000 mark in a while, I think. Huh? It stayed below 100,000.
Part of the exuberance that pushed it over 100,000 was the belief that one of the early ambitions of the Trump administration would be a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Hasn't been a whole lot of talk about that. There's been some minor discussions, but nothing substantive. So that excitement kind of went away because it's real easy to get in and want to buy in when you think the federal government's going to start strategically holding some of this stuff.
Yeah. It seems to have lost, I think, as you say, a little enthusiasm, and just the outlook going forward has been tempered a bit, and that nothing has really occurred there. You know, it's just going to put it out there. It's easy to identify all these spending cuts and all these other actions. It's a much different thing to put them into practice. But there's no doubt, first thing you got to do is find it, point it out. And that's a whole bunch of progress relative to what has occurred in the past, because there's been no interest in exposing this nonsense. Maybe that's because I know there are a whole bunch of people who benefit from, shall we say, the largesse of the federal government. Looks like they're in for a rude awakening. And you talked about it yesterday. I actually looked at a chart attesting to your statement that most of these people that work in government, in the agencies, they're all Democrats. Like by a large percentage. It's shocking. And of course,
I mean, it should have been obvious just looking at the politics of Washington, D.C. local elections.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, arguably the most Democrat area in the country, right there in Washington, D.C. and in the neighboring Virginia and Maryland. Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And that has manifested in policy as well. There are just lots of statements by the president, by Elon Musk, proposals, ideas floated here of late that you really kind of have to parse through to figure it out. And that is one of the reasons that the markets are selling off. There is concern now that the president and Musk are calling for defense cuts. 8% per year, I believe, is the figure being proposed. And I think it's 3 years, if I'm not mistaken. 8% per year. That's significant. And I'm not sure, I can't remember the last time we cut defense. And in fact, the last time we appropriated through the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, that's a collection of bills, if you will, that are used to fund the gigantic Department of Defense. It increased versus the prior iteration of such funding by about $46 billion. It's now up to just under $900 billion per year for defense. It's also thought that there's some $2.5 trillion for which they are unable to account in the Pentagon. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth has invited the Doge boys to come on in and find it. Where is all this dang money? Where are all these assets? So that should be an interesting revelation once we get some details there. But this has kind of thrown the markets for a loop because there are a lot of companies that profit from their vending, supplying the Department of Defense. And it's certainly sent some shockwaves through that military-industrial complex that I believe it was General Dwight D. President Eisenhower warned us about, did he not, when he parted? I believe it was him. He saw it coming. Amazing for a man who dedicated his life to military service. He saw it. He really did. Basically what he was saying is your government's getting too cozy with the private sector, and there's lots of wink-wink, quid pro quos, et cetera, going on. Was it in him? Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. In the 50s, right? Early 60s, 50s, before John F. Kennedy succeeded him.
I want to say that was in his last speech to the nation.
That's what I think,
as
too.
president.
His parting speech. So, that, I think, had more of command, shall we say, and a bigger component of government spending than it is now. Now, nonetheless, I think it's out of control. I think it's subject to...
I mean, I could be mistaken, but I think I remember seeing somewhere that the defense budget during the Vietnam era was between 2 and 3 times more than the current budget as a percentage of the total economy.
I think that's right. And that's generally how it's measured, as a percentage of GDP. So, here in the United States, we spend right at about 3.5% of our GDP on our military budget. The problem is, of course, over there in the EU, less than 1%. And you remember even back in...
Except for Poland.
Yeah. President Trump, they're a little bit more leaning more towards spending their money, their GDP. Russia, too, honestly. I mean, Russia to the point where, okay, let's see, we can eat or we can have tanks. Okay, tanks. I mean, that literally is how Ronald Reagan took them down. He forced their hand on that because their economy sucked, and he knew it. And by building up the nation's defense, he forced them to spend an outsized amount of their economic output on defense, and it took them down. So Mr. Trump has rightfully called out the EU and saying, you got to pay your old fair share here. He did that in the first term. He's doing that again. Vice President J.D. Vance, he scolded him once again for that. We cannot be your protector. You got to pay your fair share. And you know why they don't? Because they spend it on stupid social programs where now in some of those countries, You just don't work for 2 months of a year. Isn't it France where they take the whole month off of August or something? The whole country just shuts down. I think they also have laws that say that an employer can be fined or cited in some way, penalized for just sending an email after hours to an employee. Just nonsense like that.
I still think the worst example of European governance comes from France, where I don't remember the last time this was done, but for a prolonged period of time in France's history, whenever inflation just got too bad, they would just lop off a couple decimal places on everything.
Unbelievable.
Oh, that used to be $100. Now it's 10.
That's right. That's one way to do it with the old currency. Yeah, so 8% over the next 5 years. So each year, 8% this year. Now, when you're talking 8% of nearly $900 billion, that's a lot of change. That's $72 billion. So put you down in the $830 billion range. You whack off another 8%, that's another $66 billion. Now, you're all of a sudden you're down to $770, and it just keeps on going from there. You'd be below 2016 levels. It was $650 billion. I use that because that was President Trump's first year in office in his first term. We've got Stephen Skoltetti at 11:05, and then we've got Ashley Edwards at 12:05.
Order for Jennifer.
This segment of Middays with Gerard Gibert is brought to you by Covington County Hospital in Collins, where your health matters.
Middays with Gerard Gibert.
Let's do this.
On SuperTalk Mississippi.
Let's go.
We're back with you in the Element Well studio. We do need to pass on to you that the Senate down there at the Mississippi State Capitol has gavelled in, and Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hosemann, who collapsed during the proceedings there in the state Senate yesterday, has been essentially diagnosed with being dehydrated, and he's back on the job today, standing up in the Mississippi State Senate. So that is good news, that apparently it was nothing serious and he fully recovered. We learned that he's a big runner, that perhaps he went out and did some running and just didn't water up enough. And that's, even when it's cold, that's possible, right? I mean, doesn't your body kind of work a little overtime trying to keep yourself...
Well, you're trying to stay warm. And
yeah.
You're trying to regulate your internal body temperature.
So you still got to drink and hydrate when you're out, even though you may not sweat as much when you're out running or just exerting physically. And apparently that's what happened there, so that's good news. He's back on the job in the state Senate. Also, today, Rhino, big day for those of us who take a hobby in watching taxes. What a boring life, right? 10:30 in about 7 minutes. The Mississippi State Senate Finance Committee.
Ah, crap, that's going to interfere with me watching paint dry.
They are going to discuss the Senate tax bill. Now, Senator Josh Harkins came on and talked about, we got the bill. And he brought it with him when he came in the studio. That was Wednesday, I believe, right? Or Tuesday, pardon me. Right? I don't think it was yesterday. Man, it's hard to keep up with it when you interview so many people. I know we had Secretary of State Michael Watson on yesterday. That's right. It was the day before. It was Tuesday. We had the vehicle, the manufacturing auto forecast CEO on yesterday, along with Secretary of State Michael Watson. It was Tuesday that we had Senator Josh Harkins. So he brought the bill with him, recall. It has officially been filed. and it will be considered taken up in the Senate Finance Committee today. Now, the Finance Committee, there are 52 state senators. I believe about half of the body are members of the Finance Committee, because I think you get appropriations involved in that as well. So that will be taken up. I get the distinct feeling, I do, that both houses are dug in, that they're going to stand pat on their proposals. I don't see a lot of concessions. Maybe we need to get something done. You know, the procession that you so aptly describe as the bills are being transmitted, the term that is used from one side to the other.
We haven't even talked about what happens in conference.
Maybe we need to do something to change our luck on that so we can get some consensus and get a bill to the governor's desk.
Well, I mean, if it gets to conference, it's worse than a Ringling Brothers act. I mean, 3 rings isn't nearly enough.
Well, so the big deal is the Senate says, no, we're not going to fully eliminate the income tax. However, we will reduce it down to 2.99%. That over 4 years in quarter-point increments. The House, on the other hand, says, nope, we got to fully eliminate that old income tax. We're going to do that over 10 years, starting with one big cut between 26 and 27, tax years 26 and 27, from 4 to 3%. That's a 25% cut right off the bat. And then we're going to get rid of that 3% in 0.3% increments over 10 years. That's kind of the distinction between the two plans from an income tax perspective. The House says because we're going to eliminate the income tax and lose that $2.2 in current dollars billion of revenue, which is just under 30% of total spending. It actually sits right at 30% of total spending. We're going to end the diversion of sales taxes back to the municipalities. We're going to retain that as an offset. However, we're going to impose a 1.5% local options, what it's called, sales tax, on general item purchases, everything that's not groceries. But we're going to give you some relief in groceries. Oh, the Senate plan does nothing there. 1.5%. The House plan on general sales tax, 0 change in the Senate plan. On groceries, the Senate says right now, today, effective July 1, 2025, we're going to cut the old grocery sales tax from 7 to 5%. And the House says, well, we're going to wait till next year, and we're going to reduce it to a combination of local and state to 6%, and then we're going to whittle that down to 4% over 10. And then the final major component, fuel. The House says we're going to impose a 5% sales tax on fuel purchases effective July 1, 2026. And the Senate says we're not going to do that. Rather, we're going to increase the present excise tax on fuel by 3 cents per year over 3 years. And then from that point forward, the excise tax will be adjusted for inflation, using the Federal Reserve's calculation of the inflation of road construction, road maintenance, everything involved in that receives funding, that is funded by that new sales tax or new excise tax in this case. So there you go, 4 deals. Real quickly, a summary. House says we're going to fully eliminate the income tax over 10 years. The Senate says we're going to take it down to 2.99 over 4. The House says we're going to add 1.5% sales tax as an offset for eliminating the income tax. The Senate says, nope, we're not going to touch that. The House says we're going to reduce the grocery tax starting off with down to 6% and then incrementally down to 4% over 10. The Senate says we're going to go ahead and take the sales tax on groceries from 7 to 5 immediately. The House says we're going to put a 5% sales tax percentage on fuel. Whatever you buy $100 of fuel, you pay $5. The Senate says we're just going to modify the existing excise tax, which is a dollar value tax per gallon. Right now it's 18.4%. They're going to take that, what would be, to 27 cents over 3 years and then indexed for inflation beyond. Hope that makes sense. The other major provision, the House says we're going to dedicate the first $100 million of proceeds from the Mississippi Lottery Corporation to the public employees retirement system. And the Senate says that, no, we're not going to touch PERS in this bill. That's what they say. So, those are the major provisions. What do you guys think? Let me know. Hold on a second. I'm going to close the door.
Yeah, somebody's talking out in the hallway, and it's a no-no in the radio station. It's not supposed to be outside the on-air door.
That's on me. I didn't close the door. I just forgot this morning. We got 2 doors into the studio. I closed one, and as Rhino knows, these doors are about 5 inches thick. That's why it's soundproof in the studio here. Apologize for that. So what do you guys think?
I think the best idea out of the Senate was to not try to reinvent the wheel with the excise tax, but the rest of that Senate idea is just kind of crap.
Yeah.
So take the House plan, change that sales tax thing to excise tax, and you got the best deal.
Yeah. I think that that's a possibility. And you also, guys, the governor, man, he's pretty firm. He wants full elimination of the income tax. Now, I've also heard him say in the past, I'll sign any bill that cuts taxes. Right? You've heard him say that. So can the House and Senate work together and get a bill that cuts taxes but maybe stops short of the House goal of full elimination and the governor's goal? Would he sign off on that? I don't know, honestly. But the deadline, is it next Wednesday, I think we determined, for revenue and appropriations bills?
I think that's the deadline to have them, yeah.
Out of the originating chamber. And that's when they, of course, are handed off for the Rhino described procession across the hall there. Now, the such procession has already occurred with the House bill. It's already in the Senate, waiting for the next action. I don't think it's been assigned even to a committee at this point, because I think the Senate has been awaiting the filing of their bill. Something else that it appears to me, I haven't checked every bill the Senate's passed that's gone down to the House. It looks like, Rhino, listen to this, they're being double referred.
A lot of them, yeah.
And I think that's kind of intentional to induce the Senate to really take a hard look at the House tax bill, it being their top priority, labeled as such, styled as such, labeled, entitled as such, HB1. We're coming right back in the Element Wealth studio.
Get on!
Middays with Gerard Gibert
It is on!
on SuperTalk Mississippi.
We're back with you in the Element Wealth studio. Can you explain what does the 14 flags mean that Elon is posting on X, particularly on President's Day? That is floating around. I'm really not sure. I heard something about that, but really don't know. Let's hear about SB 2347 and the Republican votes for it. Which bill is that? What's SB 2347? Have to look that up. Not sure. Philip in Walthall County says government defense industry cooperation was the first major step in Germany in the early 1930s, and we saw where that led. I think that's why President Eisenhower warned us about that. In the military-industrial complex. Oh, this is the meth bill. That is getting a lot of attention. And it has been passed, and I believe what this does is revises the penalty for simple possession from being a felony to a misdemeanor. Did I get that right? Rhino, was that your understanding of this measure?
Yeah, it updates the penalties for simple possession of methamphetamine with guidelines based on the amount of the drug in someone's possession. So, for example, for 1 gram or less or 5 dosage units or less, there are different consequences compared to someone who has a whole bunch of it.
Okay. That was a bill principally authored by Senator Daniel Sparks. I believe he was on with Richard this morning. I didn't get a chance to tune into that. I'm sure he was asked about it.
It's also got a stair-step approach where if you keep getting caught for the same thing, the penalties and fines and charges go up. So if you get caught with more, you get caught again, you're going to get in more trouble.
Right.
Penalties include up to 5 years in prison and or hefty fines. Larger amounts equal stiffer penalties.
On the ceasefire text line, which is 601-879-4395. We need a bill introduced that provides life alert or term limits for our leaders in Jackson and Washington. There's no appetite to do that. I guess the question that I always pose is, why do not the voters effectively term limit candidates? Why do we have to have a law to do that? Why couldn't we do that at the ballot box? And I mean, we could go down a rabbit hole on that for sure as to why that's the case. Paul and Brandon says, I'm wishing Delbert the best, but I hope this gets him to retire after this term. If we can't have term limits, then we need a maximum age limit for politicians, and this probably shows why. He's same age as President Trump, Paul. Just putting that out there to think about it. So I think different people are just in different physical and mental condition as they age. And in this particular case, being dehydrated is something we all could experience, even young folks. And you know, Rhino, early on in the football season, for example, when it's hot, football players are sweating. You see them down there with cramps like constantly.
To answer the question about the Elon Musk tweet with the flags.
Yeah.
That's the number of flags that will fit on one row on the Twitter app.
Okay.
You just wanted to make a row of flags.
Okay. Both bodies are Republican. Why the great divide? Talking about tax reform. I hear you, and there's frustration, I think it's fair to say, among the electorate and citizens that we got control of all the levers of lawmaking with the House, Senate, and governor's mansion. Why can't we come together? Well, that's the answer to that question is it's 174 people between the two chambers plus a governor, and they don't all see things the same way. And I'll be honest with you that when I see just observing in social media, and I get that's anecdotal, the response and the reaction to these two measures, man, it's all over the map. A working person that would benefit the most because of their income says, yeah, let's take the House bill. And a retired person says, no, the House bill's terrible. That's what you're dealing with. Because it would increase sales taxes as an offset to completely eliminating the income tax. That's effectively why we can't come to a consensus. They're just different opinions being expressed by constituents. Now, the Speaker has been very diligent in sharing endorsements from various organizations, looking at it more from a group perspective, if you will, like the Railroaders Association was one, Mississippi Railroaders, and they came out full-throated endorsement. I submit that's likely because the House bill, while it would provide for the transfer of the first $100 million of net proceeds from the Mississippi Lottery Corporation to the Public Employees Retirement System, whereas it currently transfers the first 80 to roads and bridges, the excess over that would go half to the Education Enhancement Fund and half to multimodal transportation. That includes trains, rail, I would argue that's why they support that. The Senate doesn't really touch the lottery proceeds, which, by the way, average $126 million per year. That's been the average since the lottery was launched in November of 2019. Let's see here. Gridlock when both houses are majority GOP is why people are disgusted with politics and politicians. I hear you, but again, the politicians have people that are encouraging them to go in two different directions. So I would submit that it's beyond just those who we elect and their failure to achieve consensus. There's no consensus amongst the people who elect them. They don't agree. Again, I pointed out, those who you likely will see disagree or don't like this bill versus that bill and vice versa. And so what they're trying to do is consider all that in achieving some degree of consensus to get something done. Ostensibly, that's what they're going to do. I don't really know. I've gotten no feedback from either side. It's just my gut feel that they're dug in. There are concerns, more so in the Senate. They've been a bit methodical, at least, in analyzing the effect of both the House and the Senate bill at a macro level, meaning how does this affect the budget in the general fund for the state over the long term? And I point out again my serious concerns about the Medicaid program because of the Trump administration really making a lot of waves and undertones about gutting Medicaid spending, and that would affect the amount of money that flows from the federal government to all the states, including Mississippi, on Medicaid. However, if you want to know, guys, one of the reasons the market is selling off today, yesterday, the president said Medicaid won't be touched. However, House Republicans say they want to cut it by billions. What do you guys think? So the president says, nope, we're not touching Medicaid, not touching Medicare, not touching Social Security. We're going to look at 8% cuts on defense. And then, of course, the Doge boys, so far they found about $150 billion. That's a lot of money. But the deficit this year is on a run rate of being $2.5 trillion. And the president has also asked both houses to include a provision in their respective budget resolutions that would increase the debt ceiling by $4 trillion over 2 years, meaning they fully expect to continue to produce $2 trillion annual deficits. So I ask you guys this. How many times, Rhino, have we seen on this very text line people really criticizing members, Mississippi's delegation? You voted to increase the debt ceiling. Have we not seen that? Multiple times. Every time it happens, right? So here we have the president, whom I suspect most of these people voted for, says, increase the debt ceiling. You got the president saying, I want to include in one big, beautiful bill. I mean, he's really trashing the Senate now, man, and I'm for it. I'm with him on this. We need one bill the way the House is contemplating that would address extension of the Trump tax cuts as well as funding for immigration, energy, and a lot of this other stuff, and to make that fit within the reconciliation rules so that it could pass with a simple majority in the Senate. The House is looking at cutting Medicaid substantially. But now Mr. Trump comes out yesterday and says, nope, don't want to touch Medicaid. Man, I don't know. My head's spinning, and so are the markets, and that's why there's a sell-off. We've got to have some clarity. Please, Mr. President, give us some clarity. We need faith, confidence, and certainty. Investors, businesses don't have that right now. That's why you're seeing a sell-off. That's why you're seeing consumer sentiment plummet. Inflation is rearing its ugly head again. Coming back, final segment, hour one.
Are we going to do this?
Middays with Gerard Gibert.
Keep rolling. 3, 2, 1.
On SuperTalk Mississippi.
for you here. The mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass. You know where she was while her city was burning? In Ghana. Well, nobody told me not to go. Can you believe that? You mean somebody's got to tell you not to leave the city over which you preside when it is ablaze? How stupid can you be?
It's even worse than that. In an interview yesterday or 2 days ago, probably 2 days ago now, she was talking about how they're going to investigate how nobody even brought up the fact that she shouldn't be leaving.
Oh, my God.
They're going to hold an investigation for a decision that ultimately fell on you.
Well, isn't that the natural deflection from someone in her position? Let's form a committee to go study it for a while. I am not responsible. I can't possibly be accountable or culpable in this stupid decision. Well, then what the hell did you run for office for? Man, oh man, I'm sorry. I get fired up at the lunacy of that. More concerned about that, honestly, than the damage, the toll on her own dang town. That's ridiculous. On the C Spire text line, gridlock. We got that earlier, but also says that's what compromise is for. I hear you, and I want to see some compromise too, because I want to see us continue to provide tax relief to Mississippi taxpayers, businesses, employers, consumers, all the above. So let's keep this discussion going, and I hope that's the case. But there are legitimate concerns. I expressed this in the article I wrote. If you haven't seen that, you can go to supertalk.fm and find it. Explained. HB1 is the title of the article. And we go through some details there, and we just summarize for you the main distinctions between the competing measures. But I do have some concerns about the pressure on our general fund going forward. Health insurance is a big one. It's going up. General liability and casualty insurance, it's going up everywhere. In fact, that's a large reason. It's a big component of inflation. Automobile insurance is up substantially. General liability, casualty insurance, not just for the public sector. I'm talking about just in the country in general. It's a big driver of inflation and one of the reasons why we can't get it under control. So, and then the Medicaid program, which is gigantic and a big old problem. Now the president says, no, we're not going to cut it. I look forward to interviewing. We're very fortunate to have Congressman Jason Smith on with us tomorrow. He's the man in the House of Representatives who chairs the Senate Ways and Means Committee. He literally is the key figure in the design of this budget bill, which at least is designed to cut taxes and keep the Trump tax cuts going, while also cutting some spending to make all the numbers work so that it could pass through the Senate. But he will be the primary architect of that legislation. Of course, he's working with lots of other people as well, but I mean, he is the most powerful figure in that process on behalf of the Speaker. We're going to have him on tomorrow, and I look forward to that discussion with him and get his thoughts on the Senate's version and Mr. Trump's guidance here that, no, we don't want to cut Medicaid, which I have felt was the prime target to make the numbers work to get the Trump tax cuts extended. He's got members also, does the Speaker of the House, who want to increase the state and local tax deduction, which was capped at $10,000 in the Trump tax cuts in 2017. And Mr. Trump has also said, yeah, I'd be for that. Also, I want to include my exemption from income tax on tips, overtime, Social Security. Just making all that worth mathematically without any significant cuts to spending means you don't have any passable legislation. At a minimum, we got to get the existing tax environment extended. it'd be best if we could make it permanent, make it really hard to repeal in the future. This is a big concern, and we are so fortunate that, and kudos to Congressman Michael Guest, who helped orchestrate and coordinate getting Representative Jason Smith, an extremely busy man right now, as they're working on this budget resolution process in both the House and the Senate. Getting him on tomorrow for him to share his thoughts on all this that we're talking about here, I think is really a big score for our audience here in the state of Mississippi. We're stepping aside for a break right now. Fox News, SuperTalk News coming your way. And then it's Stephen Scoltetti. He's a professor of philosophy, chairs the Department of Philosophy and Religion at Ole Miss, also serves as the director of the Declaration of Independence Center for the Study of American Freedom. Stay with us.
Middays with Gerard Gibert is brought to you by the Mississippi Business Journal. Visit msbusinessjournal.com. Scott Coopwood, publisher. Welcome to the show that challenges you to think deeply, and look beyond political posturing. You're listening to Middays with Gerard Gibert here on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. Hour 2 of Middays live from the Element Wealth studio on this
Friday Eve.
We're joined now by Stephen Scoltetti. He's a professor of philosophy, chair of philosophy and religion at the University of Mississippi. He serves as the director of the not so long ago minted Declaration of Independence Center for the Study of American Freedom. Professor Scoltetti, always good to see you, sir. Thanks for joining us.
Anytime, Gerard. It's great to see you again, too.
All right, so we've been in a bit of a whirlwind, a tsunami, breakneck speed, I think, is the way some of the journalists like to describe what we have witnessed since Mr. Trump was inaugurated, I think exactly a month ago, if I'm not mistaken, was sworn into office. Can you think of another time in history where so much has occurred in such a compressed period of time after a president is inaugurated?
No, I haven't. It really has been something to behold. Although I will say, a lot of conservative intellectuals have been carefully planning for this moment, for the last 4 years. A part of it, of course, was in the press called the whatever it was, the Plan 2050.
Oh, yeah.
And got a lot of press for that. But in a serious way, there were a lot of very smart people thinking very carefully about what Trump would need to do to really turn the tide and make real progress. So it's exciting to see a lot of these things come to fruition that had already been planned for quite a while.
Yeah, the Project 2025, I think, is what you're referring to there.
2025.
Yeah,
right.
That from the Heritage Foundation. There does appear to be some of that stuff that's been brought forward, I guess it's fair to say. I do have some concerns, Professor, about the fact that it seems like we're more governed by executive order and the implementation of those orders down at the agency level, more than we are the 535 people we elect and send to the Congress.
Yeah, that's right. And while it is exciting to see Trump doing all these things, it is important to back out, take the longer perspective on this, and see that this is not the way a functional government should be behaving in the long term. As an immediate course correction, that's fine. But in terms of creating law that we all as a country can embrace for a long term, more needs to happen. But that's going to require sort of going back to an older tradition where Congress plays a larger role in governing instead of just turning all of our psychological attention to the president.
Yeah, and I think it's also fair to say that much of what the president has done, I certainly agree with, and most of it was unraveling, rescinding what the prior president had done, also through executive order.
That's right. Yeah, that's absolutely right. And there is, a dynamic that got started a long time ago with the New Deal and then developed into kind of a system of government where there really are four branches, where we have a kind of a permanent administrative state that works independently of Congress and the president. And over time, that administrative state became so powerful that it did sort of achieve a kind of an escape velocity, so that it kind of function on its own. So we do need to do more than just say, hey, let's go back to the older way of doing it, where we just have these three co-equal branches of government, because talking that way just ignores the fact that there's this giant elephant in the room that really is exercising real power and is positioning itself in light of everything that's done. So, that's why it is chaotic and difficult to kind of predict how this is going to go down. But I think Trump is right in sensing that we can't just keep doing the old things, making the same old arguments, and just hoping something different is going to happen. The dynamic has to change.
Yeah, and you certainly have to applaud him for being someone who just doesn't speak about ideas and proposals and things he wants to do and offers an agenda. Man, he acts on it. But I would say that's a function of his private sector business background.
Right. Now, as a philosopher, I do want to stick up for the idea of just talking about ideas that we don't end up implementing. But that said, when someone is in a position of real power and leadership, you are expecting more than words, and rightfully so. It shouldn't just be a parlor game where everyone just sort of says some words and then nothing changes. We really do need things to change, because the country is on a trajectory that just is unsustainable. Something has to give. We need change. Yeah, and I think it's fair to say that much of what he has ordered really is a manifestation of what was signaled on Election Day. If you look at many of these issues, just absolutely simply that we shouldn't allow biological males to compete in female sporting competition, that polls way high. It pulls Democrats into it. It's not partisan. There's some things that are partisan. That's not, for example. Yeah, and I think a lot of the pollsters and have shown that a lot of Trump's support right now is coming from disaffected Democrats in terms of the rating of how well he's doing so far as the president. Now, we'll see. Those things can change. But there are a lot of things he's trying to do that kind of cross over the traditional left-right distinction and really blur the lines and try to find a sort of new coalition.
Yeah. Tell us what's going on at the Declaration of Independence Center.
A lot. First of all, we're really making strides in terms of attracting students. When we first started out, we had 26 students sign up for our classes, and we had 7 Freedom Studies minors. Now we've got 135 students signed up for our classes, and we've got over 30 Freedom Studies minors. So we're headed in the right direction. It's always a matter of just we're building up our operations so that we can handle the demand as it increases. But our next big initiative is to really start advertising what we're doing in a bigger way, so that just more people know about the Declaration of Independence Center and all of the opportunities we're providing for talented students.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's good to hear. And I mean, it's unique in the nation, is it not, Professor?
Yeah, it is. Here's the way I would position it. On the one hand, the purpose of the center is fundamentally positive. I'm trying to add something to the University of Mississippi that students didn't have an opportunity to explore before. I want them to see that American freedom and the tradition of American liberty is something so interesting and exciting that it's worthy of study.
Sure.
Just like, other students might be interested in environmentalism and the environment. Well, students also could be excited to study the American environment of liberty. And I want to give them that opportunity. And I think that is unique because I think a lot of the other centers and programs in the United States, they tend to take the view more of, let's look at government or let's look at civics. And I'm for those too, but I want to make sure that students are focused on American liberty as part of that broader civics education. And I do think that's what makes us unique here.
I got it. Before we go here, are you aware of legislation being considered at the state capitol that would essentially abolish DEI programs and any form of DEI efforts? What do you think about that?
Yeah. Oh, I'm watching those very, very closely. I think we definitely have to stop the kind of a set of requirements that were set up so that students had to be subject and faculty had to be subject to mandatory training and had to be looking at the world in a certain way and had to take the position in divisive debates. And so the thing I do approve of in these bills is that we just can't be indoctrinating people in that way. We need to return to an environment where things can be discussed, debated, and no one is sort of forced to toe a line in these difficult debates we're having as a country.
Yeah, it's an excellent response. Totally agree. And I've read the legislation. I've interviewed folks on both sides of this issue. And just makes common sense to me. We shouldn't be forcing any of that. We shouldn't be selecting our enrollment. Got about 30 seconds.
I think that's right. I think it's an exciting time in higher education because now we're returning to an environment where there's just going to be a lot of different things and we can get back to debate, dialogue, and discussion and the pursuit for knowledge.
Appreciate it, Professor. Always good talking to you. Thanks.
Great to see you, Gerard.
If you're feeling it, Middays with Gerard Gibert.
What? This is so awesome.
On SuperTalk Mississippi.
Thanks for joining us. Welcome back. We are in the Element Wealth studio. It's Middays. Are you thinking about a retirement? Do you have a plan? Go to myelementwealth.com or call 601-957-6006 to let Element Wealth help you find your balance between income growth and guarantees. Today on In a Mississippi Minute with Steve Azar, you'll hear an interview with author and Mississippi music historian Wesley Smith. In a Mississippi Minute with Steve Azar is presented by Superior Catfish. Remember, there's catfish, then there is Superior Catfish. It's U.S. farm-raised catfish with homegrown flavor. Ask for it by name at your favorite store or restaurant. Go to superiorcatfish.com for more info. Don't forget to sign up for the fabulous SuperTalk Mississippi newsletter, supertalk.fm/newsletter. That's how you do that. I received a text from Senator Josh Harkins. He's the chair of the all-powerful Senate Finance Committee. They have taken up the Senate tax reform bill in committee. We'll see where that goes. Also, we were informed that Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hosemann, back at work today, presiding over the state Senate, opened up, received a standing ovation from the members because he's well and back. So that was good. Good move. So on the C Spire text line, Big T from Coffeyville says, we're making all these cuts but still producing a $2 trillion deficit. Why, he says. And it's a legitimate question because it seems, Rhino, we don't really talk about the math a lot. Man, I'm all for making the cuts. The ridiculous spending, and we've known this. It's just finally somebody's had the gumption, the president, who has, I think, very smartly, wisely brought in a third party who really has no interest in the cuts or in rooting out and exposing all the waste, fraud, and abuse other than to help the country. It's hard to appoint a government committee, a task force. Hey, go find all the waste. What are the odds they're going to come up with anything? That's a problem. And one person's wasteful dollar is another just requirement. It's just essential. Got to have it. We may look at stuff and say, you know what? The drag queens in Ecuador funding is just something that's outrageous, outlandish, unthinkable. And the next person says, oh, that's very important. We got to have that. That's how upside down we are in our country to a great extent. So it's a math problem. If you look at what has been identified at this point, it's about $159 billion since Doge has been on watch. That's all documented and published on their sites, social media sites. And there's a lot more. There's no doubt. They started out with the goal of finding $2 trillion, but they've since trimmed that to $1 trillion. Well, when you got $1 trillion of cuts and you got a $2 trillion deficit, that's half of it. And you've also got a substantial amount of the spending in the mandatory entitlement programs. It's on autopilot. Now, there's improper payments. We've all learned about those. We've known about this in those programs, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, that are part of the findings, the identified cost savings. But keep in mind also there are legitimate, natural, organic increases in those programs. You're just playing whack-a-mole. You cut $1 over here, but you legitimately, lawfully have to spend another $1 over here. So you're breaking even. Now, the good news is you're not digging the hole any deeper, and there's something to be said for that. But this notion that we're not going to produce $2 trillion deficits, I hate to be the bearer of bad news there, and I could absolutely eat my words. And if I do, man, I'll celebrate. But at this point, I don't see it. I just don't see a path. And I think that's why I look forward to the conversation tomorrow with Chairman Jason Smith, House Ways and Means Committee, who's right in the trenches dealing with this situation. And keep this in mind, folks, that the Congress only appropriates 15% of the total outlays. The rest of it is on autopilot through the statutes that were passed. Going back to 1935, the Social Security creation, for example. Yeah, I'm all for getting rid of the illegitimate Social Security payments, the improper amount of money going out. Agree. That's terrible. And we would have lower debt if this had been addressed years ago, because it's been going on for a long time. It's nothing new. We would have had lower deficits and thus lower debt that we're all responsible for, and arguably lower inflation that we had to endure. But we got a long way to go, to get to where we trim the deficit by any substantial amount and then start getting to the debt. Now, I support some form of dedicating certain funds to the debt and that we don't presently have. So, for example, opening up the federal lands and waters for leasing for oil and gas administration. We receive lease revenue and royalties from that due to the taxpayers that we're not currently getting. Does it make sense to dedicate some of those monies to paying down the debt, just bypassing going straight into the Treasury for general fund spending? So it's a thought. You've heard proposals from the president, from Elon Musk, that we should pay a Doge dividend. And I know a lot of people get excited about that. And that's just from the anticipated cuts to spending identified so far. But the honest truth is we're just going to borrow money for that purpose. I don't support that. And I think it would be inflationary and really not addressing our core problem. What I'm for is you're identifying those wasteful spending practices and disbursements. Get rid of that. And that should, in fact, mean we don't need to spend as much money in the future, and thus the deficit. Because we're going to have natural increases in revenue, and that's the thing the Democrats will not acknowledge. Fact is, since the Trump tax cuts were passed, we have increased our revenues by about 25%. But here's the problem, guys. We've increased spending by 75%. That's why we have $2 trillion deficits. And the vast majority of that is in the statutory entitlement programs. And by the way, please don't tell me they're not entitlements. I would encourage you to look. I'm not trying to be arrogant here, but you see this all the time, don't you, Rhino? Social Security, Medicare, not entitlements. They are, guys, because it means you're entitled to them. They're not. It's not welfare. I think most people, Rhino, believe that entitlement and welfare assistance are synonymous. They're not. Entitlement simply means you paid into it, you're entitled to it. So that is the proper way to describe those programs. You're entitled to them. We agree. Paid into them. You essentially entered into a contract with the federal government. You contribute. When you retire, you get money out. That's the way it works. But right now, both Social Security and Medicare are having to dig into their savings accounts, essentially, what are called their trust funds, to make ends meet, meaning there ain't enough people paying in to cover what's going out. And eventually that trust fund is going to run dry in both programs. And that is a big old problem because at that point, the programs, both Social Security and Medicare, will not be able to meet their financial obligations. And we just keep kicking that can down the road. You could make the same analysis for the public employees retirement system. Same deal. We're going to get to that point. Can't meet obligations. I'm sure there are people out there that are going to argue with me again on that. I would just point you to the actuaries, people that are a lot smarter than me on this. I can read actuarial reports, but I've never practiced as an actuary. And it's not just that one that's come forward and said this is a problem, it's multiple. So there's no secret. It too has its share of problems. When we come back, I made an open records request here within state government. I'll share with you what that was for and where we stand on that. We're coming right back in the Element Wealth studio.
Adoring fans, it's time for
Middays with Gerard Gibert on SuperTalk Mississippi.
In order to steal money from the government from the C Spire text line, you must have it accounted for. I don't believe some of the money was actually spent on the things they say they were. And that's Walt on the 601. That's actually been exposed as well, Walt, that a lot of it was earmarked but never spent. A lot of it was spent. It's insane. And we're just looking at the at the low-hanging fruit, honestly, at this point. We really hadn't
the $800 hammers.
Yeah, it's crazy, stupid stuff like that. There's a ton of it. But again, and I know it's hard to wrap your head around this, we need trillions, unfortunately. And we're finding billions, which is great. But to get to balancing the budget and chipping away at the debt, we need trillions. And I just don't see the path to that. Gerard, from time to time, you mentioned the Kudlow Show. I now watch Larry every day. Thanks, Bub and Stark. Well, that's good to hear, Bub. He's great, isn't he? Of course, you know his history. He worked as a youngster in the Reagan administration and then was a key member of Trump's economic team in the first term. And he just has the content and the guests. It's an hour show every day on the Fox Business Network. And he has the content and the guests that I really enjoy a lot. And, in fact, Congressman Jason Smith, who will be with us tomorrow, is a regular guest on that program. And he is always enjoyable, always insightful, always so factual and doesn't skirt the questions. I look forward to our discussion with him tomorrow. Dan in Hattiesburg, $1,300 coffee mugs. Ain't no doubt. It's crazy. Mr. G, the only thing I believe will at least curb some of this foolishness is to make the culprit known and levy the punishment, says Crosby Simmons. Yeah, I think you're right. The problem is, Crosby, much of what's being uncovered and reported is not illegal. Nobody broke any laws. That's even a worse problem, in my view. And this goes back to our discussion with Professor Skoltedi that these rogue agencies essentially been running the country. These faceless, unelected bureaucrats. The president and Elon Musk are exposing that, and that is a good thing. And I think that's the first start, honestly, to addressing the crazy spending, the crazy regulations and rules and policies that affect us all in our daily lives. Let's get back to the way our government was designed and envisioned by our founders, that we elect the people that represent us, and these people that are imposing on our lives, honestly, were not elected. We don't even know who they were.
We just know the vast majority of them don't think like you and I think.
Right. Every billion saved is one step closer to the trillions. Better yet, what's the future savings on that money? I hear you. Again, I'm not denying that that's not a good thing. It absolutely is. But consider this. If your house budget is upside down by $100 a month, and you found $1, and you celebrate, well, now you're $99 in the hole. That's kind of what we're dealing with here. I'm just saying that I think we're going to get to a point pretty rapidly here where we found all we can. And it's great that we're getting rid of all that, and it's that we're reining that in. Man, I'm all for it. It should have been done a long time ago, honestly. But it stops short of what I think the people want, is to see some work on trimming that debt. And I think folks are tired of seeing $2 trillion deficits. Just to put it in perspective, in Trump's first term, I think I got this number right. Back in the 2017-18 time frame, the deficit's $600, $700 billion, which is a lot. Here, short 8 years later, we're at the $2 trillion mark. And that's with revenues going up by 25%. And if you say, well, that's all the crazy spending by the Congress, okay. I'll do the math for you on that, because I did research that. The discretionary spending the Congress appropriates, it's up $400 billion, which is a lot in 8 years. That's defense and all the other agencies. Yet the deficit is more than doubled by $1.3 trillion. So the other $750, $800 billion, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, veterans benefits, other financial assistance programs, and interest on the debt, which nobody touches. So that's the financial dilemma. Now, I was going to tell you about a records request I made. Senator Angela Hill on social media said that she found $15.8 million just essentially buried in an agency's finances. And so I questioned her offline, and I'm not saying anything that she would not want me to ask or share. Which agency? It's MDEQ, Mississippi Department of Environmental Quality, $15.8 million. So I thought, okay, well, I want to go see how this is reported on their financial statements. I couldn't find their financial statements. I looked high and low. I did every kind of search you could imagine. I looked on their website. I looked on DFA's, Office of State Auditors, Legislative Budget Office's website. I had our news department do the same just in case I missed something. We can't find it. So we did a open records request for their fully audited financial statements with all the accompanying documents and footnotes. And it's not because I think they did anything wrong, just so you guys know. At this point, I don't know. I'm just curious as to how that $15.8 million is recorded and presented on their officially audited financial statements. I think there's some people just looking, Rhino, out on social media that go in there and say, oh, yeah, any minute that was going to be transferred into somebody's account. Well, no, that's not the case. It's not that easy. And that would easily be exposed. That's easy. The bigger question is, to what extent does that factor into our state's appropriations into the agencies? If you got, let's just say, a $100 million budget, and you've got 15, call it an even 15 million in cash, which is what this is, sitting on your balance sheet, well, maybe we can take most of that. You need some cash reserves. We don't want to drain it, but most of that into consideration in this year's appropriation. Maybe you only need $80 million. Let's plow back $10 million of it. You're going to have to use $10 million of your cash to pay for your expenses next year. Am I making sense here, Rhino? I mean, it's right. I mean, you got that sitting in your account. So you need less revenue, and you combine that. I got a sneaking suspicion, and again, this is no breaking of the law. There's nothing, no malfeasance, no fraud. I just believe that after I look at their financial statements, their balance sheet, that the same exists across all our agencies. I bet you'll find that there's a big chunk of money sitting on the balance sheets of most of our agencies. And again, that's fine. And they're in interest-bearing accounts, so it's not like it's not putting the taxpayers' money to work. I'm just pointing out that maybe we should consider that in our appropriation, that you have accumulated money, and Lord knows, since the COVID stuff, who the heck knows where all this federal money, it hurts your head to try to keep up with all the helicopter money that went out there, right? And where that landed in the agencies, in the counties, in the municipalities.
It will be interesting when DOJ starts digging into the PPP loans.
What a mess that was. And that was a 2020 program that I disagree with the President's Secretary of the Treasury, Steve Mnuchin's idea. Notice he's not part of the administration this go-round. I was concerned about that from day one, that it just looked like easy money for the picking there, did it not? Turned out that was the case. So, but you're going to, it's impossible not only to plow that back, but for the most part, it's all legitimate. Now, there was a lot of defrauding of it. There's a lot of illegitimate. And I'll point once again to how smart and crafty are the bad guys, who, by the way, penetrated Equifaxes. I'm telling you, a lot of this stuff comes from Equifax. Remember that giant breach of Social Security numbers? And the way that works is mafia syndicates, essentially, overseas, pay smart technical people to go penetrate these systems, pull Social Security numbers, and then they sell them. And then somebody else takes a Social Security number, and next thing you know, just as this happened to me that I shared on the program, somebody files an unemployment claim with my Social Security number.
Most people, when they think of their Social Security number being stolen, they think, oh no, my bank account's going to be drained, my taxes aren't going to be able to be filed, and all this. And that can happen, but 99 times out of 100, if your Social Security number is stolen, it winds up in a list, and it's worth about 3 or 4 cents a piece, but there's thousands in the list, and they sell those lists on the black market.
Ding, 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 ding. That's exactly what's happened. And that's a lot of the defrauding of the IRS, of Social Security, of Medicare. That's where it kept PPP, unemployment, which includes federal dollars as well. That's exactly where it came from. Because our systems are terrible. We're coming right back. Stay with us.
Come on.
Middays with Gerard Gibert
All right, we are back.
on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Love's like a road that you travel on when there's one day here and the next day gone. Sometimes you bend, sometimes you stand, sometimes you turn your back to the wind. There's a world outside the darkened door where blues won't haunt you anymore.
We're back with you in the Element Well studio. So, one final thought on this records request. Again, I'm not looking that the Mississippi Department of Environmental Quality is engaged in any kind of wrongdoing with their finances whatsoever. But I am concerned and disturbed that I can't find audited financial statements for all the various agencies. I can find budget requests. LBO does a great job of that, but those are at very high level. Now, I know they get into more detailed discussions when they meet with legislators to discuss their upcoming year's appropriations. I get that. I wonder if it doesn't make sense for every agency head to present their audited financial statements as part of their budget request to both chambers, the entire legislature, at a detailed level, just the same as we do in the private sector, and review all the major categories on the balance sheet, on the income statement, statement of fund balance, whatever the particular applicable accounting standard is to the specific agency. There are a number of them on their financial statement presentation. But what I'm looking for with DEQ is how this $15.8 million is presented in the associated footnote. There should be an auditor's footnote because it's a deferred liability, and there generally is going to be a footnote to discuss that so folks will know. But it seems like every agency head ought to have to come before the legislature and review. They should have a command, like any CEO would, of their financial performance and position and status, and dovetail that into their request in the coming year with some support for their budget. Now, I know a lot of them do that, and again, I'm not being critical of them whatsoever. I'm being a little critical of the process and the fact that I can't find their audited financial statements. And I may be looking in the wrong place. And if somebody lets me know, yeah, here they are, okay, it's on me. I didn't search for it correctly. But just the fact that it's that hard to find tells you that, okay, we ought to make it more evident. It ought to be easier. And the filing of records requests, no big deal. And that's, by the way, that's the way the senator said she learned about the $15.8 million. Now, I don't know exactly what her request was. I think it stopped short of, I want to see the full financial report. Now, I did look at the agency's annual report, but there are no financial statements in it. Normally, when you look at an organization's annual report, private sector entity, you're going to see their financial statements. There's going to be a whole lot of discussion about the organization and its performance and its strategy and its risks and its challenges. It will include guidance, but it's also going to have financial statements. That's the main component of such an annual report. I guess that's not required in the state of Mississippi. Seems like to me it should be. Just an idea there. So we also have, Rhino, you brought this up late yesterday. I don't think we got it on the air. We have a judge that has essentially instructed a newspaper to remove a piece that was rather critical on a governing body. Tell the folks about that.
Yeah, it was an order handed down. I've got the document here somewhere, but it's in the city of Clarksdale. And it was involving a local paper. I think it's the Clarksdale Press Register or something like that. They ran an unsigned editorial that was basically questioning why the city leadership felt the need to change the wording in their petition to the legislature. For a little background, they were petitioning the legislature to add a sin tax on alcohol, tobacco, marijuana in order to pay for more police. That was the agreed-upon goal, the agreed-upon reason for the petition to add the sin tax. Well, the city leadership held a secret meeting without telling anybody, including the aggrieved media here, that they were going to change the wording to instead say that it would be to pay, quote, to support and promote public safety, crime prevention, and continued economic growth in the city. Which that's a bit much, that's a lot bit broader than just saying to pay for more police. To pay for more police, that could be used to increase pay for the current officers or to hire new ones. If it's to, quote, support and promote public safety, crime prevention, and continued economic growth in the city, well, that could be anything in the eyes of a politician. So they wrote an editorial criticizing it. The city of Clarksdale went to a judge. Somehow they convinced a judge to go against the First Amendment of the freaking Bill of Rights. And here we are.
It's Judge Crystal Wise Martin, I believe, correct? She's in my Rotary, a very nice lady. I'm a little surprised at this, honestly. I didn't see that coming, and there may be another side to this, but right now on the surface, it looks like we have a rogue judge. We're going to take a break for Fox News and SuperTalk News. Ashley Edwards after.
Get ready to go beyond the headlines and join a meaningful conversation with people from around the state. Hello? You're listening to MidDays with Gerard Gibert here on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. It is hour 3, the afternoon portion of MidDays, live from the Element Wealth studio on this
Friday Eve.
It's our pleasure to welcome now Ashley Edwards, coastal Mississippi entrepreneur, former president and CEO of the Gulf Coast Business Council, also a SuperTalk Mississippi news column contributor. Ashley, hadn't seen you in a while, man. Good to have you on.
Yeah, great to see you, Gerard.
So tell us about this bill that's kind of meandering its way through the legislature that would affect the way seafood is labeled here in the state of Mississippi.
So look, it's an important piece of legislation. I would call it common sense legislation. I'm sure your listeners remember well the stories last year about some of the coast restaurants, well-known restaurants and seafood distributors that were involved in selling mislabeled seafood. Average person may listen to that and say, well, so what? But it's certainly a big deal, definitely a big deal in coastal Mississippi. And, at this time of year, it's even more important. We're approaching crawfish season. And as you know, the local seafood staples here, things that are produced locally, really are Mississippi catfish, crawfish, and shrimp right here on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. And, we're in a situation now where a lot of restaurants are importing those same items, crawfish, catfish, and shrimp, from Southeast Asia, from farms in Southeast Asia. When those items are sold and passed off to consumers as locally sourced wild seafood, you get a real problem there because you're able to sell what is really a premium product in the market, wild caught Mississippi seafood, at a premium price point. But the food you're importing and selling it as that oftentimes is coming from mass farms in Southeast Asia. The quality is a lot worse. And so essentially you're lying to consumers. So there's part of it that's just consumer protection. And part of it, Gerard, is just common sort of economic protections for Mississippi agricultural producers that are in the seafood business, because their market gets smaller and smaller and smaller when their premium product is passed over in favor of imports.
Yeah, so help us understand what this legislation would do to combat that problem, Ashley.
It's very simple. It just creates a law that establishes that dealers, sellers of this seafood have to label it with a country of origin. And so essentially you would go into a restaurant, if you're going to order crawfish, or if you're going to order shrimp, and that crawfish or shrimp came from Thailand or Vietnam, then it would have to say that on the menu. So you would actually know where the seafood that you're buying is coming from.
Okay. So then, I mean, you're right. We saw lots of reports about this over the last year or so. Any understanding of why some of these restaurants would mislabel, why they would represent that the seafood was fresh and local, but in fact it wasn't?
Tale as old as time, Gerard, because of money, profitability. You're talking about a pennies on the dollar difference between the cost for the imported seafood versus the locally caught wild seafood. And so if you're able to buy it at pennies on a dollar and sell it as a premium product at a high price point, you maximize your profits. And that has really been what the push is. It's also a lot of where the push is in the lobbying that's going on against this legislation as it's going through the Mississippi legislature, because there's a lot of producers and a lot of restaurants that would just soon stay under the status quo and maximize the profit from it. And so, the bill did pass the Mississippi House unanimously. It's not been passed in the Senate yet, but it got very good support in the Mississippi House.
Are we blazing a new trail here, Ashley? Is this something that's been done in other states that also have a local fresh seafood industry?
Has been done in other states, including our neighboring Gulf states. And so we're a little behind the ball here in terms of what other Gulf states have done to address this same issue. So Mississippi definitely will not be the trailblazer here, but really will get its laws in line more with what we see in our neighboring states, where there are some of these consumer protections and protections for agricultural producers in their state.
Makes total sense. Anything else you've been paying attention to that's going on in the state capitol thus far?
I've been kind of paying attention to a lot of these things that are being talked about, the competing tax legislation in the House and Senate, which, for a guy like me, I think that they're both steps in the right direction.
Yeah.
It's going to be interesting to see how the differences between the two get ironed out and whether or not you get a logjam in the legislature over disagreements between the House and Senate. But from a philosophical standpoint, clearly they're on the same path here to try to undertake some pretty massive tax reform. And ultimately, I think that's probably going to be the marquee accomplishment of this legislative session, if in fact a compromise is reached. And I have a feeling it probably will be. Okay.
You're more optimistic about it than I am. I'm just in my discussions privately, it feels like they're dug in on both sides of the Capitol there, but you never know what happens when they get into conference. I totally agree.
Well, I think they are dug in. I mean, I completely agree with that. And maybe you're right. Maybe I am looking at it with rose-colored glasses. Certainly from a philosophical standpoint, the governor, the House, and the Senate all agree that there needs to be some pretty substantial tax reforms. Where the disagreements are really is in what it's going to do to revenue collections and the potential to have sustainable revenues over periods of time. Lieutenant Governor's obviously taken a different position than the governor or the House leadership on it. And so, look, there are clearly still some ways to go in terms of them being able to find a meeting of the minds. I do think the Senate is going to be less apt to be aggressive. They're going to be more risk averse in what that final legislation looks like. And so the likelihood is if there is movement, it will have to be movement towards the Senate's position.
I think that's absolutely right. I completely agree with you. I think you could say that simply because the House's bill fully eliminates the income tax, that's, I guess I don't want to call it extreme, but it's a larger, more impactful action, shall we say, than the Senate's is, which I do believe is a bit more risk adverse and taking into consideration what may be some spending headwinds coming our way that they're trying to factor into the sausage making here. Tomorrow, I don't know.
I generally
go ahead.
I was going to say I generally appreciate the Senate's position on it. I mean, I think you can get multiple bites at the apple if you incrementally phase in something over time. When you take big, bold action early on with something that affects the ability to fund state agencies and all the operations of the state of Mississippi, I think it's right to take a little bit more of a cautious approach to it. So, we'll see where it goes. But I applaud both the House and Senate for taking on something that ultimately will make us a much more competitive state with other southeastern states that have already, taken pretty aggressive tax cutting actions.
Yeah, I think that's true. One area where we are noticeably lagging is in school choice. We don't seem to be able to get the numbers we need in both chambers to do anything meaningful there. You're probably tracking the fact that Alabama, Tennessee, Louisiana, Arkansas, all of our border states have been busy passing legislation that would expand school choice options, and we're having a hard time just getting sort of an entry-level phase of that done, just in the form of public-to-public transfer.
Well, look, I think it's an interesting commentary on, a Republican majority in both the House and the Senate who, ideologically are very, very well aligned with the National Republican Party and with President Trump, who's obviously spoken very favorably of school choice. So I think it really tells the tale of just how powerful the local school boards and the local school lobbies are for these local legislators across the state. This is a little bit of a fear-based reaction. There's a lot of these school districts that do not want to see a loss of funding. In some cases, some of the school districts actually would probably be more in the black as a result of this than others, but there's no question it can cause some pain to some underperforming school districts. I think a lot of the school choice advocates believe that those are the types of things that will ultimately shake up the system a bit and create better outcomes. But clearly the legislators who are thinking about the response from home have not gotten on that page yet. So it's actually been interesting to me to see how just slow the uptake has been with sort of the rank and file legislators.
If you can hang around, we can continue the discussion. I got a couple of thoughts on what you just said there about choice, and then we can dig into some of the federal political matters. You good?
Sounds great.
All right. We got Ashley Edwards, Coastal Mississippi entrepreneur, on the middays. We're coming right back.
Pure Air Consultants has always been your go-to for reliable and affordable heating and cooling systems, and now we're offering an additional product to avoid the 25 to 30% increase that everyone is talking about. With Day and Night, a Carrier family product, your professionals at Pure Air Consultants can install a reliable heating and cooling system with a 10-year system warranty. Pure Air Consultants and Day and Night, providing ultimate comfort for your home for an affordable price. Call us today for your free quote, 601-939-7420. That's 601-939-7420, or find us online at mypureairconsultants.com.
Retired or...
This is Bob, just walking in here, ESI Supply. Robert, FR clothes are big here.
Yeah, we sell a lot of flame-resistant FR clothing to industry that are working in the plant environments and oil and gas industry where they need flame-resistant clothing. So if you have needs for FR-rated clothing, ESI is your number one source.
Stop by and see them at 111 Aerosmith Drive in Richland, or give them a call at 601-933-4910. That's 601-933-4910, or online at esisupply.net.
Get ready, Greater Jackson area. The big one, the Great Southern Gun and Knife Show, is coming for 2 big days only at the Mississippi Coliseum. Show hours Saturday 9 till 5, Sunday 10 till 5. Hundreds of dealers' tables available, full of guns, knives, ammunition, holsters, gun books, camouflage, jewelry, and related items. Hunters and collectors, the big show's for you. Buy, sell, trade, or just spend the day browsing. Ladies are especially welcome. Admission is just $10 for adults and $2 for kids ages 6 to 11. Sorry, no one under the age of 18 admitted without a parent. Got any guns to sell? Be sure they're unloaded and bring them to the show. Thousands of buyers will be there. Instant background checks available for gun purchases. The big one, the Great Southern Gun and Knife Show, this weekend, Saturday 9 to 5, Sunday 10 to 5 at the Mississippi Coliseum. Take the High Street exit off I-55 and follow the signs. Exercise your right to keep and bear arms. While you're there, be sure to register for the door prize. See you this weekend at the big one. Sure as shooting, don't miss it.
Order Filibuster. Just everything you need to know to start your day smarter. Mornings with Richard Cross on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Covering the stories that matter most to Mississippians. Gerard Gibert. Middays with Gerard. SuperTalk Mississippi.
We're back with you in the Element Well studio. We're visiting with Ashley Edwards. He's a coastal Mississippi entrepreneur. So you made the point before we went to break, Ashley, about the rather powerful lobby from public schools. I would call it the education establishment that, as you know, wants to keep the status quo. They oppose education freedom and school choice. And here's kind of my take on it, and I'll let you react after I describe it. I talked to a lot of those legislators down there. I head down to the Capitol quite a bit, and I speak to them specifically about this subject. And here's the way I see it. They've got some compensated, paid local lobbyists who receive, by the way, most of their funding, all of their funding comes from donations, some of it from out of state, some of it local. You know, I've been affiliated with the premier school choice advocate in Power, Mississippi, since it was formed in 2014. So it's that advocacy that's kind of concentrated from an organization versus superintendents and teachers and individuals in home districts 200 miles away. And I really do think that's what influences them. I hear it from the legislators all the time. Man, my superintendents beat me up on this deal. Do you not think that's what's going on here?
There's no question about it. You know, I tell people all the time, you have to remember these legislators, this is almost like the feudal system because they go home to, right. in many cases, they go home to very rural communities or rural counties across Mississippi. And in each one of these counties or communities, there is a group of who's who that sort of call the shots, decide who's going to be in the legislature.
No doubt.
And that always includes the school board members and the superintendents. And so, these are powerful relationships at the local level that each legislator has. And, look, I think if you gave all these legislators truth serum, they would probably rather be able to be on the side of school choice and get it done.
I think that's right.
But at the end of the day, their biggest fear is not being able to win the next election.
No doubt about it.
And that's always going to win out in local politics.
If there would be any value, in my view, with term limits, it'd be that I think as long as you're always concerned about your actions, your words, your behavior, your votes, etc., with an eye towards the next election cycle, as opposed to someone who knows they're being termed out. And there's a double-edged sword there, because you can know you're being termed out and go scorched earth and go crazy and burn the place down. And we've seen that at the federal level in particular with these guys that know that they're naturally attriting, and, man, they'll just dump all kinds of earmarks and crazy bills to have a parade when they go home, But at the state level, if we did that, then perhaps they'd make the hard decisions and cast the difficult ballots, which they know, as you indicate, are in the best interest of their state, of their communities. But it it's counter in that it would make it very difficult for them to get reelected, which they wouldn't have to concern themselves with if they were termed out. So there's kind of a double-edged sword there. I don't know how to change that other than maybe impose term limits and take our risk that they won't go scorched earth on us.
Well, look, there are other states that have imposed term limits on their legislators and their statewide electeds. Of course, we do have some of those, but I mean, Gerard, as you well know, the story of the Mississippi legislature is generally one of members who serve 25, 30, 40 years, as long as they want to serve.
Yep.
And so, these are, again, it's like the feudal system. These are jobs for life, often terms.
Yeah.
And so, with that in mind, these big local issues that really affect the flow of funding are always going to take precedent over sort of the good public policy organizations and the advocacy that goes on in that way. And, and look, this is not a new issue that came up this year.
That's
We've been
right.
talking about school choice for a long time.
That's right. And the reality is, some of these districts, in particular in the House, which are smaller in nature, obviously, than Senate seats are, $10,000, $15,000 to get you elected. So, right. And it could be one or two people fund your whole dang campaign, and they drive your behavior once you're seated. You think that's right?
No question. No question about it. I mean, look, no legislature wants to be the guy that goes back to the home district and has to, every time he walks in the coffee shop, has to hear about how he took a bunch of money away from the local school district and now they can't afford anything. And so it's a tough road to hoe. I mean, there's no question about it. But I applaud the work of groups like Empower Mississippi, because I think it's an important piece of public policy. And unfortunately, in Mississippi, oftentimes it takes many, many years and sort of attrition over time to finally get the votes to do these types of things.
I think the direct sale of wine is a prime example of that, is it not? How many times have we gone to the well on that one?
That's been a huge issue of mine. And I think it goes to show you that, ideological purity kind of stops right at the edge of the page of the talking points because we've had a relative monopoly in Mississippi for a long time for a state that's controlled by a political party that believes in individual choice and individual freedom. It's crazy that it took us this long to get to this point.
I completely agree, and I want to be clear. I'm not condemning or trying to throw every member under the bus whatsoever, and I know you're not either. That's not the point. The point here is that's just the reality of how the process works. It just is, and we're just exposing it, if you will, and describing it. No big deal one way or another. Yeah, I like to say, and the Speaker of the House actually quoted me. I went to social media last week and said, Mississippi, we believe in freedom and free markets, except when it comes to education and health care, and direct sale of wine and the ballot initiative and vehicle sales. Other than that, we got you covered. So to speak. And the Speaker, he actually quoted me when he was on the show with Richard earlier this week. I think the House tends to lean more into those issues from a freedom perspective than does the Senate, you could argue. And it's just due to the makeups of the two chambers and even the respective heads of those chambers. Let's talk about the national level here with the few minutes we got left. Wow, it's been a whirlwind. In some degree, I was talking about earlier, of conflicting signals from the president. Now, the president is known for pivoting a lot of times on issues. As he learns more about something, he'll sort of change his tune on something. Man, it makes making laws hard, though, doesn't it?
Look, it does. And Gerard, I think the thing that I think about really every day now is the fact that historians are going to look at this second term of Trump likely as a bit of a catalyst in the changing of the way the separation of powers in America is handled. Trump is consolidating an incredible amount of power in the executive branch, to the point we were making earlier about school choice or some of these other issues of funding. It is very difficult because of sort of misaligned incentives in the legislative branch to get the legislative branch to shut off the spigot of money, whether that's at the state level or the federal level. because there are a lot of mouths that are fed, both literally and figuratively,
no doubt,
including a lot of folks that donate a lot of money to folks in both parties that depend on the flow of federal funds. And so when that is threatened, that is a very difficult thing to do through a legislative body. Trump has consolidated and really taken a lot of power in the executive to do those things, which is arguably the only way it can happen with dispatch. That is not something that's going to happen quickly through the legislative process. And the interesting thing about it to me, Gerard, and this is kind of the unspoken thing you hear in a lot of Republican House members and senators in Washington, I think they understand that there is a dissolution of the legislative power that's occurring, but they're okay with it because they also understand it needs to happen. And the only way it's going to happen is if Trump takes the reins and does it. And this is really unprecedented. We have not seen a Congress go along with a power grab from the executive quite the way we've seen here. I mean, think about it. The Republican talking point sheets for years during the Obama administration was, how dare he use all of these executive orders to circumvent the other branches of government and impose his will. This is tyranny. And now it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. And so there's a little hypocrisy there. But the truth of the matter is, it is the effective way that a president can use his executive power to get things done.
No doubt about it. And we've seen the limits tested in the last 3 administrations, I think it's fair to say. Ashley, always good talking to you. Appreciate you coming on. I'm sure we'll be talking to you soon. Thanks a lot, man.
Good seeing you, Gerard. Take care, man.
You bet. We're coming right back. Half an hour left of Middays from the Element Wealth Studio.
Middays with Gerard Gibert.
It is on
SuperTalk Mississippi.
We're back with you from the Element Wealth Studio. Appreciate you joining us today on the C-Spire text line. Why do the conservative Republican State Senate and conservative Republican State House of Representatives have such a different view on issues? And that's throughout the party, honestly. I would say that it's not so much fundamental disagreement on the issues as much as it is the extent to which. Let's take the taxes, for example, because that's one that we're discussing that's an extremely high profile and rather sweeping legislative matter. It's not that they disagree that we should fundamentally provide some tax relief to Mississippi taxpayers. It's just how much and through which vehicles. And the same is true at the federal level. If you look at right now the conflict that exists between the House and the Senate as they're cobbling together their respective budget resolutions, they both want to extend the Trump tax cuts, cut spending, improve and increase funding for border control and security, and implement policy law that induces more oil and gas production, energy. That was, of course, you heard Mr. Trump over and over again, drill, baby, drill. We told you yesterday about an order that's going to allow a pipeline to be constructed, actually reviving the pipeline that's already there, that connects the natural gas-rich state of Pennsylvania with the state of New York to bring down energy prices. That's an example of him fulfilling that promise. So they just have different ideas on what to prioritize. They agree fundamentally on all these issues and matters. Trump tax cuts, funding border security, propping up the energy industry, cutting spending. It's where, it's how much, it's when. It's more nuanced than just having these philosophical differences. In our state here, the Senate wants to provide income tax relief, just not fully eliminate the income tax. That doesn't mean that they couldn't take it up later. I've talked to Senator Harkins about that, and he shared with me, I want to get that done too. I just want to start with this, get us down to 2.99 in 4 years, and then see how the state's doing, and we can keep whittling away at it. And the House says, no, we're ready to get this done right now. It's going to take 10 years, but we will have been able to say that law was passed that will eventually, ultimately, abolish the state income tax. So the difference, I think, Rhino, is when you look at the Democrats and why they're all so aligned, is because most of their major issues are kind of binary in nature, if you think about it. It's not, when you look at taxes, since we're talking about that, you'd have a hard time finding a single one that's not for just taxing the ever-loving snot, right? Out of businesses, corporations, rich people. They just agree on that. There's not even, if any, disagreement on the amount. That's easy, honestly. All the crazy gender ideology stuff, they've just all leaned into that. Again, it's binary. All the climate change stuff. That's not to say there aren't some, shall we call them, closet Democrats that made dissent with their own party. They sure ain't telling us about it. I don't see hardly any of them standing up. Now, some of the analysts, James Carville, for example, Doug Schoen, legacy Democrat strategists, have come out and said, this is crazy, guys. You need to find somebody other than Chuck Schumer to carry our water, and you got to quit leaning into all the stuff that the vast majority of the country disagrees with, which is why they're irrelevant. I mean, they're trying to keep up with the president and the Republicans in the Congress, and they can't. What was it yesterday? Which one of those squad members came out and said, pretty soon people are going to be longing for Joe Biden? And she's the one that's always getting combative with Marjorie Taylor Greene. Said she had a butch bod or something like that. What's her dadgum name?
Jasmine Crockett.
That's it, yeah.
She seems to be the loudest mouth as of late.
Yeah, a total loon.
Fake as a $3 bill.
There ain't no doubt about that, because she's got some history that very much contrasts, right? It's on the record with the statements that she makes today.
She went to a well-to-do school in a well-to-do neighborhood and speaks rather well-to-do when she's not trying to gin up support for her antics.
Yeah. It's funny to watch. CJ and Delta makes a good point. How in the world was Steele ever the head of the RNC? That's a good question, because he seems to have fully embraced the Democrat agenda and is extremely critical of Republicans. There's no doubt about it. I'm not sure. Is it possible, do you think, Rhino, that he was a DEI hire, as we call it today? He being an African-American, and that maybe the party was trying to head it up by somebody that was a diversity-type hire? I don't really know. I just know that if you listen to him today, it's sort of like with Jasmine Crockett. If you listen to him today and listen to him when he was head of the party, he doesn't sound like the same guy, does he? Michael Steele, we're talking about, by the way. He seems to have kind of ventured away and drifted away from his positions when he headed up the RNC. I don't know. Randy and Myrtle says, President Trump was invited to USA-Canada fight. Oops, I meant the hockey game. Man, that was crazy, wasn't it? Ain't no doubt about it. What is the SALT tax, says Larry and Mize. Yeah, SALT, all caps, stands for state and local taxes. This is a big sticking point, Larry, in the U.S. House in particular, because you've got, and let me just explain to it what it is before I tell you what the sticking point is it's a limit of $10,000 on a federal tax return for the deduction of the amount of taxes a taxpayer pays to the state, local governments, Sales taxes, for example, income taxes. The big one is property taxes. You pay a significant amount of property taxes in the deep blue states, way more than $10,000. You also pay more income taxes, way more than $10,000. I'm talking about a large amount of the population that has just an average house and an average income in those states, but they're only allowed to deduct $10,000. That was a cap, a threshold that was included in the Trump tax cuts, the TCJA of 2017. There are reps from districts in these deep blue states. Nicole Maliotakis in New York is an example. She's a conservative, a Republican, but she represents a district where her constituents are harmed from a federal tax perspective because of the SALT limitation. And so she's lobbying hard. The Speaker and Congressman Jason Smith, we're going to ask him about that tomorrow, by the way, who's the head of the House Ways and Means Committee. They're lobbying hard saying, we got to do something about this $10,000 cap. It's always amazed me, Larry, for what it's worth. I know we've talked about this before. You got the Democrats who are always pounding the drums about higher taxes on the rich, except when it comes to the ones who live in their districts
and fund their campaigns.
Correct. For them, they want to lower their taxes, right? By increasing the state local tax deduction, the SALT cap. Oh, yeah, we got to do that, but they got to pay more taxes. You're talking out of both sides of your mouth. As my dad used to say, you're talking like a man with a paper behind. That's what my dad used to say. It is. It's double speak. Of course, they're known for that. But
that's pretty much the entirety of their vocabulary.
There are some Republicans. They're a handful. And remember, why that's important is you can't lose but one to pass legislation. That's it in the House. So you got 4 or 5 that are saying, Mr. Speaker, we got to do something about the SALT cap. And then that makes it hard because, okay, well, then we got to find cuts somewhere else or change the tax provisions elsewhere, again, to make this math work. I can't emphasize that enough, how important it is to make the math work, because otherwise you got to have 60 votes in the Senate. And when the parliamentarian over in the Senate says, sorry, guys, that measure does not comply with the math necessary to pass legislation in the upper chamber with a simple majority, they got to go back to the old drawing boards. And it just keeps going on and on and on. And that's the concern. And that's one of the things we're going to dig into with Congressman Jason Smith tomorrow. That's what it is, Larry. Hope that explanation helped. Doesn't affect most Mississippians because, quite honestly, guys, I know we all complain about our tax burden. It's pretty low here relative to the other states. Most people don't run into an issue where their sales taxes, their property taxes exceed $10,000 a year. If it does, it's by a small amount that they lose out on that deduction. Final segment is next.
Middays with Gerard.
Good for America. Good for fans of justice and truth. Good for us.
SuperTalk Mississippi.
This is what we stand for.
We are back in the Element Well studio. So we did get a question. Rhino answered it that we should pass on to you in case you haven't heard, and that is concerning the direct sale of wine, something we've been trying to get through for a long time. Looks like it is headed to the governor's desk for a signature.
Well, that's the path it's on. I don't believe it has actually left the Capitol and headed to the governor's mansion just yet.
Okay. We may have to dream up a separate procession just for that. Don't forget it's cold, by the way. There's no way to get there without going outside.
It involves a drone.
I love it. So on the C Spire text line, ban campaign contributions would solve a lot of our problems. We would have no government except those who could afford to self-fund if we did that. I'm not saying I'm necessarily against that. would that be a problem for you? Just curious. It's and I see that. When did this happen? It was a while back. You got asked by the same person. Maybe it was me that answered that question. I don't know, about legislators giving themselves raises. And there's always a lot of talk about that. And there are people that believe members of Congress, we talked about that the other day, that receive a raise every year. There actually is a law to do that, and every year they block it. Since 2010, by the way. That's how long their pay has been at the level it is now. $174,400 is what they make. And the leaders make a little bit more. There's a little premium pay for them. So I hear you. I'm not sure if banning campaign contributions, we'd have a very small number of people, sliver of people, that would run for public office, and it would only be those who could self-fund. And would be older in general, because they're the only ones that could step away from their businesses or their jobs, that have put away a nice, tidy amount of assets they could use to run a campaign. On the C-Spire text line, there was a question about the tax bills. If there are proposals to phase out state income tax, grocery tax, and plans to add 5% or other fuels taxes, are the fuel taxes going to be phased out, or with the full amount from day one? Again, it's complicated. Depends on the bill. I don't want to rehash all that for you, but on the Senate side, it phases in 3 cents a year over 3 years. On the House side, it's 5%, goes into effect immediately, but so does the reduction of the grocery tax. That gets phased out. Increase of the general sales tax, that's immediate. Complete elimination of the income tax in the House bill, again, over a period of time. But there's one big drop in 2027, the first year. So that's significant. To think about, what do I think will be done? I just don't know. I really don't. I don't have a feel for it. And I've talked to members in both houses. I just don't have a feel for it. We did learn, however, that the Senate tax bill did pass through committee. So we got the House bill that passed the full House. It's already sitting in the Senate. We got the Senate bill passed committee. It'll have to get passed by the Senate. And then I feel certain they'll go to conference, and that's where the old sausage will be made, and we'll see what emerges from that. Give every candidate the same amount of money, and that's all they get, says Tim in Cleveland. Where does that money come from, Tim? The taxpayers? I'm not for that. Have you thought through that? What do you mean, give every candidate? That's what campaign donations are, except they're private, they're voluntary. I'm not for. Now, you can, I believe, on your tax return. Can you not, like, check a box or something on your, it used to be, to put some money in the presidential campaign fund that got distributed? I don't know that that's even available. There was a time, though, when there was such a box on your tax return, like $1 or something like that. I could be
wrong.
Yeah. Is the drone being piloted by a T-Rex? Asked Dan in Hattiesburg. I like that. We need to do an AI image generation on that. We could actually tell it to do that, showing it in flight from the Mississippi State Capitol to the governor's mansion. Could we not?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I love it. Forget totally doing away with the income tax and just give those who actually pay taxes a dividend check from the surplus. I actually posted on Facebook this morning, and it's not the first time I've proposed this, just that if we cannot get consensus on tax reform, if we're scheduled to produce a $600 million surplus this year, which is what it looks like is the case, how about we just rebate that, dividend that out to the taxpayers, except here's the formula I propose, the only fair one. Do it on a pro rata basis of the taxpayer, of an individual taxpayer's taxes paid. Pick it, the last 3 years, last 5 years. Just prorate that and send them that prorated share of the surplus. As opposed to everybody just gets, and it just take the total surplus, divide it by the number of people, everybody gets the same amount. No, that's DEI. It's what that is. That's equity. I'm not for that. I'm for doing it on the more fair basis, which is based on how much they paid in. Prorate that out as a dividend. I don't think Jennifer Branning would have defeated Jim Kitchens without help like yours, so I'm not too sure about self-funding a campaign. Right, you just made my point. Only rich people would be able to run that don't need donations. We're out of here today, back tomorrow. Stay safe and God bless.
A SuperTalk Mississippi Media production.